Partners in crime are assembled. This is the first ever Crux Cast Takeover, and we're discussing challenges and opportunities facing armed forces leavers and the leaving process. So with me today, I've got John Stevenson, who served for 22 years in the Royal Signals, and by his own admission struggled with the transition process. But as a career manager in the forces, he felt he let people down under his command because he simply didn't know about transition. But he's more than making amends now, having set up the Forces Transition Group, and he aims to inform those and help those people leaving the armed forces. We then have Doug Mckay, who's served in the Army for 33 years. He's had a very varied career, including time with the Royal Marines and the RAF, and he's conducted 6 operational tours, as well as roles in recruiting, instructing and career management. He's now at Edinburgh University's Futures Institute, working on a 2-year study looking at the transition for service leavers in Scotland. And then we've got Dr. Jerry Matthews-Smith, who's an associate research professor, University Lead for Military Research and principal investigator on the Military Transitions Research Study at Edinburgh Napier University. Unfortunately, Steve Beattie couldn't be with us today, so hopefully he'll be able to join us on further debate. But I'm sure he'd be more than happy to answer questions if anyone wants to pop them into the feed after this has been aired. So I'm just going to set the scene a little bit. So first of all, there's going to be 2 terms that people are going to hear throughout this. The first one is the Armed Forces Covenant, and the second one is the phrase transition. So I'm first going to ask Doug to just explain briefly what the Armed Forces Covenant is and basically what it means to people within the services and out with the services.
Thanks, Matt. Well, I think many people will have heard of the Armed Forces Covenant, although it's not been around that long. The Armed Forces Act 2011 updated the 2006 Armed Forces Act and introduced the Armed Forces Covenant. And essentially, it's an agreement between the people of the United Kingdom, the government, and everyone who has served or is serving in the armed forces, but also their families. And that, I think, is quite important. So the covenant is all about avoiding disadvantage as a result of military service in the provision of public or commercial services, and also giving special consideration to those who have given the most, so the severely injured and bereaved families. So that's the covenant, and as I say, it's been around for 10 years now. It's a well-known document. All of the local authorities across the United Kingdom have signed it, agreeing to uphold its principles. And essentially, what it's about is avoiding disadvantage and helping people who need a little extra help. So it's not saying service people are special and must be treated in a particular way. It's saying they mustn't be disadvantaged as a result of their service, and that extends to families as well.
There's quite a nice little summary on the website. I'll drop a link into the comments. The Armed Forces Covenant in 60 seconds. So that would be useful. So sorry, Doug.
So I was just going to say there is a potential update, and there is a bill going through Parliament at the moment. It's at the second reading in the House of Commons at the moment, so obviously it has to go to the Lords yet. But it's proposing a number of changes to the Armed Forces Act, and including a proposed change to the Covenant. And the new wording is that the Act requires specific public bodies to have due regard to the principles of the Covenant in various areas: housing, education, and healthcare. So that will essentially mean that organisations and individuals providing those services will have a legal duty to take due regard to those services where service people and service families, veterans, etc., are involved.
So it's like an Equality Act for forces leavers. Well,
that's quite a good way of putting it. That's quite a good way of putting it. And it's, I think we have to be clear. It's not a legal obligation that certain things must be provided. What the words are saying essentially say organisations must give due consideration to the fact that people have served, the special circumstances, the obligations placed on people in the armed forces, the sacrifices they make, sometimes the ultimate sacrifice. So organisations providing those services must take note of those things and bear them in mind when providing services. And you asked me what that means for service leavers and other organisations. I suppose it remains to be seen because the bill hasn't gone through yet. But I think it strengthens the covenant in a number of ways, and it sends a strong message about how service leavers, service people and their families are valued. And so hopefully it's a positive thing.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm going to bring John in now. Now, there are thousands of people that leave the armed forces every year, and they go through some sort of process that we call transition. So if you could explain a little bit about the transition process and what it involved, that'd be great.
Well, I suppose the transition in its basic form, or what people actually believe it is all about, is the last 12 months and when somebody actually leaves the forces. During that 12 months, if you like, you go through a series of different things, including CTP, CTW, and lots of processes are put in place by the armed forces to help you do that. However, it doesn't really work that well, as in individually, if you don't understand it. I believe the processes that have been put in place are there for the right reasons, but more needs to be done for that transition for every single individual, because there is an issue. I think that the transition, in my opinion, should be about through service. It should also be about the 12 months, and it should also about being understanding what a veteran is like, and understanding yourself and how you're going to adapt to that. So that for me is what the transition is all about. There's many different parts of this, which I'm sure we may allude to today, but in theory, we're talking about them three things there.
Anybody else got anything to add on that? That's a great summary.
I think that's a good summary, and I think it's probably worth adding that transition from the military back to civilian life, because of course all military personnel start as civilians before they're converted to military people, is more than just moving jobs or moving houses. And John knows this as for the length of time he's served. It's a whole culture, and maybe some of the people watching will understand that too. It's not just a job; it's a lifestyle. You socialise with the people you work with. You move your family from place to place. You are absolutely in a separate life, a separate world, and sometimes the shock of leaving that and returning to normal life, if you like, is great. Depending on what you've done, what you've seen, and where you've been, and all the rest of it, and that's so the transition it's a really significant thing.
And I've experienced a couple of culture shocks in my time, and it's you emerge into a culture shock, and it's like being a rabbit in a headlight. Yeah, and there's your rabbit phrase there, Jerry.
Well, I love the rabbit one, but I was going to say that I think transition is used a lot in different settings, and I think it's really important to understand what we mean by military transition, because you've got transition in education, you've got transition in every parts of people's lives, and when I come on to talk about our study, and I'll talk about how we're dealing with that and how we're looking at that within the literature. But I think it's also important to remember that people transition, and Doug has said this, they transition in from a community and they transition back out, and then through that there are other stages of transition that people go through in their life. So this is not just a single phase, this is an ongoing part of people's lives, and I think it needs to be recognized as that.
Absolutely. Now I'm going to open this one to the floor. Now this will there's a lot going on here. There's a particular bugbear of mine, so just indulge me, if you will, while I give you a bit of background. So I left the forces in 1992, but I remember sitting in a management recruitment meeting 20 years on from that, and tabling a CV from an ex-forces person. And one of the managers to the left or the right, I can't remember, said, no. I said, what's the problem? He said, he's ex-forces. I said, what's the problem with that? They just like to shout a lot and boss people around. Don't want them. So I was actually quite taken aback by this, but I made it a point of actually looking for ex-forces people to employ, because I thought that they have a lot to offer, and I actually proved them wrong in the end, and they ended up actively looking for ex-forces people to employ. So the long-winded question is basically, what have service leavers got to offer employers and society when they emerge? I'll put that open to the floor. So, Jerry, you're top left-hand corner of my screen, so far away.
Yeah. I'll start by saying from an educational point of view, what I find with them, with the people I've worked with. And I would say that I find them motivated, team players, very much so people who are, wanting to learn and wanting to be part of what's going on, and also committed. There's a commitment that's there in terms of, if they say the assignment is going to be done by Friday, it's done by Friday. And for people like me who experience people who say, well, my hamster died and I couldn't get it done, it's fantastic to actually have people who are, so I would say reliability, dependability, motivated. That, if I was to pick three things, but I think in terms of what they have to offer, they have to offer so much that we really are only beginning to see that in terms of, their abilities in it. And I think that Doug has mentioned the covenant, but companies have signed up to the covenant, and also universities have signed up to the covenant. And where they exist, I don't know that your experience would be the same, Matt, in that these companies and these universities actively employ and set out to employ people from the forces. That is something that they want to do, and it's something that they're committed to. So I would just say on that I think that these, that the people coming out from the forces have incredible qualifications. We will move on to that, or I can talk about that now in terms of qualifications and what they've done about that. It's further down your agenda. But like any good focus group, sometimes these things come up earlier, and you may want to talk about it. But there's been an incredible amount done with the credit qualification framework to recognise the qualifications of people who have done courses in the forces. They've done that, and to actually make them recognisable to employers, to universities, and to make them transferable. So that experience that people had of going and having to start at the very beginning again, or being told that their qualifications were no good, is no longer the case. The work has been done on that. And I see that as a major step forward in us recognising qualifications and abilities of people from that.
Yeah, I think transferable skills is the key one to take away from there. John, any comments on what you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, Jerry explains that very well. And in theory, I could go into all kinds of different benefits you'd get from a service person. But I think Jerry, nailed it really. What I would say is, it's, I think we need to explain or get the service person or the service leaver to understand themselves what they offer, as much as we need to get somebody from the business side to understand. Because if we get both sides together and then it links, then it will start to work and it will all be a bit more streamlined. Mm-hmm. And I think businesses do understand. I think universities, I think college, I think education do understand. I think one of the big problems is military people simply don't understand what they offer. And when you've got that problem, it's always going to exist, and somebody will blame the other. So actually understanding what both parties see, linking it together could be the answer here.
I actually agree with you, John, and I think that the whole idea behind the credit recognition is to actually help the military people as well to realize just what it is they have to offer. They don't have to start in year one of a program. They've already got that. They can start in year two. Yeah. In fact, sometimes going into year three. Because they've already done an awful lot. They're not being forced to go back and do an A-level before they can take on the university course. They're accessing straight in. And I think it is about helping them to understand as a currency. This is a currency you can use. And also to help employers to understand, actually, do you know what? The qualification that they have is equivalent to a higher diploma, or it's equivalent to, the first 2 years of a degree. So actually, these are highly educated people who are coming here. And I think that's where employers are brought in. And then I think for the future of their career, they then realize, you know what? I can go further with this. I don't have to stop here. I've got the potential. And any of the people I've worked with always have that in abundance.
Yeah, you don't really get a degree in flexibility or anything like that, do you? So Doug, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think those are excellent points that Jerry and John have made. I think I would add that one of the challenges for service people is, and this is alluding to something that John said, not knowing themselves, is they can be a little bit passive in pushing themselves forward when it comes to finding employment. If we're talking about the employment challenges of transition. And that is a very simple explanation for that, is that service people are posted from one place to another and one job to another, all through their careers. They can volunteer for things, for specialist training. They can apply, they can occasionally be graded against their peers, which they are for promotion every year. But when it comes to getting the next job, they're told what it is, by and large. And when you come outside, life isn't like that. You've got to go from talking about the team and what we did and what we achieved to what I did, what I add, what I offer. And that's a cultural hurdle for service people. It really is. So there is that. They need to grasp that early on. They've got to sell themselves. And they've got to, having done that self-analysis piece that John's talking about, they have to be able to explain that in terms that other people can understand. So a couple of other things in terms of service people, what they offer. First of all, they've all been tested. They have all been tested, usually to their limits, whether it's in initial training or some course they've gone on, a leadership course, anything like that. They will have been tested, probably beyond what they thought they could achieve. And they've achieved it in most cases. And there's a great rush, there's a great sensation, sense of achievement in doing that. So that takes away some of the fear of trying the unknown, the unexpected. So service people will push themselves with a little bit of a helping hand to get in the door. They'll push themselves. And secondly, our leadership training is fantastic in all of the services. We train people how to lead other people, how to think about the needs of the team and the individual, how to write reports on people, how to analyze situations and come up with solutions. And then, as Jerry said, how to deliver things. That's what we offer.
I like that passive in coming forward, and there's a high degree of etiquette within the forces, and it's almost like, oh, after you. It's whereas in the civilian life, it's you've got to push yourself forward and get yourself to the top of the list. And you mentioned there they're tested beyond the limits that they knew they had. And it's just, I think, maybe John, you'd agree especially on this, because it's about channeling that ability they have into the right direction so that they know how to apply what they've learned.
Well, it's a great point. It's a great point Doug makes, and it's a conversation I have all the time with service leavers. Service leavers have this maybe a misconception that they lack corporate or commercial experience, and that's going to stop them from getting jobs. Now, slightly, not totally alike to what Doug said, but on the same theory, my answer to that is service people change jobs 2 to 3 years. It's already been alluded to. They get promoted quickly. They don't get a rule book or a book handed to them telling them how to do that next job. They turn up at the next job, they learn it very, very quickly, and off they go again, and they do it to the best of ability. They then promote to a higher job and go through the process again. So there's really their corporate and commercial experience in a nutshell. And that's what they need to be explaining to civilian employers, that they can move on. Everybody, regardless if you move to a civilian job to a civilian job, will have a deficiency. Absolutely you will. So there's no difference from leaving the military and going into a civilian job. You will have a deficiency. The ability to learn and test yourself quickly and then be running with it and making a difference, changing things, increasing business is what's important to businesses out there. So we might not have worked in the commercial or corporate environment, but very, very quickly we'll develop into it.
Do you think part of this is also... Do you think part of it is also that military people think about each other? You work as a group. You don't think about yourself. That there is this bit of it for me about how people in the military work as a group, and they look after each other, their family, they look after each other. And so there isn't this kind of the me first kind of drive that you might find in society where people think, well, that's mine, thanks very much, and I'll go for it. And then when they come out, they still have that mindset of, I work with people and everybody's important. And so they don't put themselves forward. in that way. I just wondered if you had a view on that.
I absolutely agree, Joe. That's an acute observation I have made in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
We need to sharpen up when we come out. Service. I'm sure John is telling all the service leavers he speaks to. You need to sharpen up. It's not necessarily you with the team. It's you looking out for yourself. And that's not to say we should all become selfish and ignore the needs of the team. But people need to be aware the culture is different out there.
I think what do you mean? Instead of look out for yourself, it's almost give yourself some consideration instead of none.
It's called humbleness.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's the I. Nobody wants to use I. Our greatest, or one of the greatest attributes you leave the military with, is your humbleness.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're trying to look at your future or get a job, that really needs to go out the window for a certain amount of time, and you need to start backing yourself. I'm not saying be arrogant. I'm saying you need to think about I for a certain period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what we're talking about here. Because if you put we all of the time, people don't want to employ you. It's not about you, about the team. It's about you. I. But with tangible results, quantifiable results, all of them kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And just coming on to that period, coming from the armed forces into civilian life, what was your experience, John, of that transition?
My experience was I loved the military. Still love the military, but my experience was a poor one in the fact that I didn't understand it. I use the term sleepwalking all of the time, because I kind of just went through this phase in which I don't even know what I was doing. I thought I was doing things. I believed I was doing things, and I thought something was just going to magically appear, and it didn't. Even though I was in a position to change all that for myself, first of all, because I was a career manager. But secondly, I hadn't been told at any point, you're going to change, something's going to change. Your future will be in Civilian Street, and one day that's going to happen. And I never really locked onto that. And thus the sleepwalker piece came out. So in effect, I left not having a clue what I was doing and got into a job, not the job, in which I left pretty quickly. And that then snowballed to 4 jobs in 2 years. So my transition actually happened 4 times. And that's a big issue, because mentally that's not a great place to be. Not just for me, but for my family, because every time you go through your transition, your family goes through that with you. And subsequently, I nearly lost my family because of it. Now, I don't blame anybody else for that. I blame myself for not understanding it. So I think if I'd have been made more aware during my service, I would have handled that way better. And it's as simple as that. So my experience was not a great one, but I do blame myself and believe that I could have done a whole lot better. That being said, all of them things are in place within the forces to do this. I just didn't find out about them.
Doug, your experience, you had a really good experience coming out.
I would say much better than John's. I wouldn't say it was very good. I would say it was good. I probably had more time than John did to prepare and think about it. I probably took a little more trouble than he did, but I was probably in a role where he was probably very busy. And this is part of the challenge. Just to go off at a slight tangent. One of the main challenges for service people is they're frequently in really busy jobs. And as John has explained, we move every 2 or 3 years. You've got 6 months to get really good at your job. And by the time you're really good, and you might have been tested in various scenarios for real, then you're moving on to the next thing. So there's a little bit of a sort of timescale lottery as well. When you elect to leave has got to be managed around whatever the organization you're a part of is doing at the time. And sometimes that's inconvenient for the organization or inconvenient for the individual. It's very rare it's convenient for both, and that's just the way it is. And between the individual and the organization, guess which wins? Yeah, you know it is. So that's how it is with an organization like the military, because it's serious business. And there's lots of downtime and lots of fun, but it isn't always convenient when individuals say, I'm leaving. And for whatever reason they're leaving. It might be a family issue, it could be an illness, it could be an end of a contract. There are all sorts of reasons why people finish and move on. So that's the first thing. When does it happen? And leaving sufficient time to find out about it, making the effort to find out about it, taking the help that is there. There are people who can help you. There are education officers across the services whose role is to help people improve their skills and their knowledge, but also to help them think about what they're going to do when they get out. There is an MOD contractor whose job it is to help people with retraining, to do resettlement training for people in order that they can head in a particular direction when they get out. And all of those things are great, but it comes back to the individual, having the time, making the effort, thinking about themselves rather than what the organization is focused on. Sometimes that's very tough. And also knowing what they want to do. This is another thing John will deal with a lot. A lot of service people have got no idea what they want to do when they leave. If you've been something technical in one of the services, a Navy diver or a Royal Engineer or you're a pilot, let us say, those are obvious transferable skills. But all of the services have people who do much more generic or very specialized things pertaining not to anything at all, or something very, very specific in the military, something really niche. And a lot of those guys have no idea what they want to do. And so they put it off, They don't think about it, and then they're about to go.
I can identify that. I'm a chopped pilot from the 1990s, and our standard joke was, "What do you say to a chopped pilot?" And it was a Big Mac and fries, please, because it is harsh. We were harsh on ourselves. So it is knowing, because you set yourself, you've set your goals. You've had this great career in the Army, Navy, or Air Force, and then you look for something similar in civilian life, and it's not always there. But you then need to be able to draw on those transferable skills, and people like John and the procedures that are in place are helping people channel those through. So if I can just quickly summarize, so far we've got a lot of skills that the ex-forces people can offer, or people leaving, transitioning can offer. We've got very different experiences from at an individual level, but we've got a process and a procedure in place that perhaps could be communicated a little bit better within the organisation, but also without, when people are on the process of leaving. But what's changing now? So we've got things that are being done by people like John in the Forces Transition Group, other charities. So John, could you just allude to the sort of help that people can get outside of the forces, or as they're transitioning, and then we'll come on to what's changing in the academia.
Yeah, well, what's changing in the forces is fantastic. How long that's going to take is another question, but at least things are being done and it's being realised, so that's fantastic. But what the Forces Transition Group can do is offer an alternative, to give you another train, another track to go down, because I think the more areas, the more people you speak to, the more understanding you have, the better off you're going to be. So lots of different people giving you great information is probably more help than just going off by yourself and just say, I'm just going to do this. So the Forces Transition Group have developed a evolution of the service person. Now, ultimately, once I get that right, which I've just about have, what we want to do is put that into the evolution of the service person, and we've got more time to deal with that person. So ultimately, they turn up at the end of their career, and the military program or the contractor that takes them out of the forces has got a much easier job, because the person actually leaving understands it. But at the minute, the evolution generally forms around understanding who you are. So we go back to what Doug was mentioning there, because once you understand who you are, your relatable skills, and you start to find your direction, you can do that through CV writing, through understanding how to network. And in a short period of time, you can then make your decision of which directions you're going in. Now, the problem is, and Doug absolutely alluded to it, everybody or nobody or very few have any idea what they really want to do. And the biggest question and the biggest problem I have is I've got no idea. That's a big problem, because how can you write a CV with that? How can you network in them circles? How can you possibly search for a job? So understanding what that direction is crucial, and getting that direction as early as possible as well is a great place to be, because then you can start doing your homework on what you really want to do in them arenas and build your network with a bit more strength. Now, we can do all of them things. The end result we're starting to work on now, and we're creating mass jobs in which should get people to the job. It's the bit that we perhaps are lagging behind in, but I suspect that will come back. COVID didn't help us with that. We are signing big contracts with decent companies now who are going to have lots on offer, who might not necessarily be in the Armed Forces Covenant, but will be. And then we're going to bring jobs to people and give the businesses that we're dealing with an understanding of the military. So that link I was talking to before, we're bringing that together. And if we can get them percentage rates to a decent level with people getting to the job, then I think we're going to change a lot. But first of all, the first thing you need to understand is who you are, and that's the first part of the process for the forces transition.
And Doug, you got any comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what John is doing is fantastic. He gave me some advice not so long ago, and I think that it's a fantastic concept, and I wish him all the best with it. I just thought I would, because you asked Matt about what is changing, and John did mention that there are some changes. I just thought, if I may, I'll just touch a little bit on what the MOD is doing, because that's where the sort of the service sits, if you like, while people are still serving. And I think we'd all agree you can't leave it until you're out before you start thinking about this stuff. So the MOD has introduced a new holistic transition strategy, and they've changed the focus away from people thinking about what they're going to do next in the last couple of years, and we'll do a resettlement course and off we go. They're sort of saying, let's focus on the whole person and the service family. And they've been listening to some of the studies, some of the academic studies that have been conducted in the last few years. So they're trying to put in place some of the recommendations that these studies have made. So focus on the service person as a whole, focus on families, provide more resources, provide direction to commanders, saying it's your duty to help people with transition, and also try and equalize support to people leaving across the services and across defence. So you can imagine in a busy operational unit, it isn't so easy for people to prepare, whereas they're in a training environment or doing something a little lower key, they've probably got a bit more time. So the effort, the direction coming from the MOD is everyone has got to make time for this. Commanders have a duty to support people who are preparing to leave, and the MOD is also trying to identify gaps and avoid duplication of effort, as you can imagine. So that is what's happening sort of officially, if you like.
And our commanders are equipped. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
It was aimed really at John having our commanders are equipped to take people through a transition.
Well, commanders are busy.
Yeah.
Obviously, they are very clever people, and I believe that they will read this service publication and will have to read it to give that support. Mm-hmm. My fear with it is time. My fear is constant change, because commanders don't stay there for 20 years. They move every year, 2 years, 3 years. So whatever they put in place, who then follows that up? If there's quick change, it'll be very, very difficult. Mm-hmm. It's always going to be placed on how much they want to put in it. One commander might be all over it. The next commander might come in and be on operations for 12 months. How is he ever going, or she going to do that? Mm-hmm. So my fear is we may have commanders who actually, they don't understand the emotion of leaving, nor do they understand the civilian world, are trying to help people with all the best intentions, but can't actually really do that. Yes, support, but what's that support going to be? So are we going to all do different things and get different support? So let's say CV writing through service. We'll go to one company for one unit, one company for the next unit, one company. And then we've got a real problem with what we're actually trying to teach people with this. And CVs can do lots of things like relatable skills. So it could be very educational for people as well.
Mm-hmm.
Or could we get somebody in like the Forces Transition Group who could really scale and bring this to the party and really help? Not only that, we could do it for free, which is a big part. There's a big piece of this problem that we could help with. And we've worked out our maths. We worked out how we could do this, and we've worked with many units. Yes, we understand there's problems with that because getting everybody in one room for one day is not going to be easy, but we would work on the logistics side of that. So I think we could bring way more to the party. I definitely think commanders will do everything they can because that's how they are brought up. And of course, they want to look after their people. Whether they can affect that, you know, we could say that this has been there before. Yes, wasn't support for families such, but PDR was there. Now I was around when PDR came out. It failed. PDR failed because the culture didn't allow it to progress. Now, if people haven't got the capacity to carry out JSP 100 in this new program, then it'll fail.
Could I ask a question here?
I was going to say those are all very fair points, and I think the most significant change that is being proposed is that the onus is also being placed on the individual. And John, you were talking earlier, and sorry, Jerry, forgive me just jumping in there. The culture change being brought in by this is trying to get people to understand much earlier in their career about the importance of making sure that they track what they do, courses, qualifications, experiences, and start thinking as early as they possibly can about how that might help them subsequently when it comes to explaining to a prospective future employer what they offer to the party. And I hope even if commanders are busy and units are in operations, then that will sink in and as low down as possible and as early as possible, because that's really important. Sorry.
And I think, my question was actually very similar to what you're saying, Doug. And what I was thinking was there was always an expectation many years ago that when you went into the military, that was a job for life. That's what it was. Yeah. But that expectation will not be there so much with the new recruits coming in, because they will know that it's not a job for life, that they're, it's slightly different. And I think that will impact on the way in which they actually see their career panning out. So I think what you're saying is really important. Yes, for people who are coming out now, who maybe thought going in, this was where I was going to be, or who have maybe been there for many, many years and then leave there and come out, that, that's quite a shock. But for some of the others, because of what Doug has just explained around about, that the new strategy and around about the fact that people are more sort of mobile now than they've been before, in terms of we all do different jobs, that some of that will happen because of the change, and some of it will happen because, as you say, John, because of the way in which people look at it. But there is this bit around about, the person themselves accepting that is what they want to do, because there must be some ambivalence when people say, I want to leave. That's quite scary, isn't it?
Well, PDR was ownership.
Mm-hmm.
It was a big
that's the personal development record you're talking about, John.
Yes, and it was to own your future.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've still got mine, but if I look inside it, I did about 18 months worth of work.
I did less than that with mine.
So Doug's point is right. The culture has to change on this, and of course, when the culture does change, and this is why it'll take a while, it has to change at the level of where people are coming in, because then they make at some point some middle management, some go on further, then it will be passed back because it will be normal.
I think it's also worth, and I know Jerry's going to speak about this later, it's also worth mentioning that there is some work going on to help map military qualifications across to civilian equivalents. And certainly Jerry, the university that Jerry is with, has been working closely with the Scottish Government, Scottish Skills Development Service, Skills Development Scotland, and another organisation, and the military headquarters themselves, to help do that mapping process. And I think that's happening in other places too. So that's a good development.
That's amazing.
But also, do you know, the other part of this, John, and I think it's quite important, is that, you know, when you're working with somebody, I would imagine in the field, they have to learn in one way. In other words, if you need something done, you need it done now. There isn't time to think, there isn't time to reflect, there isn't that opportunity that we would like to be available for people. So there isn't always that isn't always part of the thinking that goes on. Whereas, you know, when you have to think about your career and you have to think about those changes, it isn't going to be going out and having another job for the rest of your life. It's still transient, but that is uncertain when you have a family, when you have commitments, all of those things which must scare people, regardless of what kind of preparation is put in place. And I think that there are things offered. Nobody is saying there aren't, but maybe taking up those things makes it very real and makes you think, actually, this is really happening. I'm doing it. Don't know, but
just coming back to the what's changing element. You elaborated earlier, Jerry, about the education changes in the education. Doug, just I'm going to give you a job as a mediator, Doug, because that was quite fortuitously my next question on my list. So in terms of the work or the developments in education for Fortis leavers, could you elaborate on that a little bit further?
I can, of course. I mean, I think that the most important one is the credit rating one that we've both spoken about, and the fact that there's recognition for qualifications that people have done. But I think the other thing is that, you know, we have now, I can speak more about Scotland than Englandshire, John. Sorry, I don't always have as much understanding of there, but we have a HEFE network now, that's higher education and further education, who've come together with what we call, you know, Armed Forces Champions, because these universities have signed up to the covenant. And these Armed Forces Champions work together across universities to look at and to map potential opportunities for people from the forces coming out. If they have to move from one place to another, that all universities will accept this currency. Now, that's really quite important, because up to now, they wouldn't have. They would have said, no, our program is different, and so therefore we can't do that. Whereas now, so the first thing is, it is possible to move from one place to the other. Universities work together. There's an incredible move to get universities to work together and to open up pathways. We know that military people could be deployed halfway through a degree. So education doesn't necessarily have to be after you leave the forces. Somebody could do that during their time there if they wanted to plan that in. But if they were deployed, then, I mean, we have had people who've been watching videos while they've been deployed as part of their education. So it's about flexibility. And I think that universities, not only for the forces, but for everybody, because of the way in which they've had to be much more open access, have actually recognized that they need to be more flexible, that there needs to be more opportunity, and that there needs to be more support for people who are coming back to education, who maybe haven't been in that type of situation since they were 15. And education itself has changed. So there's huge changes going on there. And one of the things that you said, John, that I thought was really, really true was that military people are humble. And when I speak to people at education fairs or whatever, they say, well, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that. I wouldn't be able to do that. You know, I'm not educated. They talk about skills. But the reality is that they don't recognize, and people don't recognize, that actually to be skilled, you have to be educated. You have to understand the theory to do the practice. Do you know? So actually, military people coming out are not skilled. They are skilled and educated. Yeah. And I think we should start using those terms, because their qualifications are high-level qualifications and they're very capable people, but they don't believe that, because people say to them, well, you've got some skills. And somebody like
I'm just going to ask you to fit forward a bit, Jerry, because you've looked like you're having a really bright idea, because you've got the sun just coming above your head. So that's better. We were just getting you silhouetted there. So yeah, sorry to cut you off.
It's because what I'm saying is that people who do skills have to have knowledge. They have to have understanding. They have ability. But if you tell them you just have skills, somebody like me saying, "Do you want to come into education?" "Well, I'm not doing that. That's scary. I've not done that." Or, I wasn't good at school. I wasn't good at books and things. But actually, the experience that these people bring to the table, their understanding of that and their abilities is much more powerful than any reading of any book. And I think we need to get that message across, that there is an open door here. Maybe not when you come out first. Maybe you need the job and the house and all the things. But my oldest graduate was 84, so learning is lifelong. And I would hope that, people would take that on board.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important that people understand that through service, but also have the abilities to remain connected with that when they leave as well.
Yeah.
It's very easy to disconnect with it all and then think, well, I can never do that, and there's no way I can get back into it. And there is problems with some of that as well. But what you're saying is absolutely amazing. It's fantastic. And if people are going to cross what they've learned or what they're doing into education, and somebody's going to allow that to happen, I mean, that's fantastic, and it shows real, forward thinking, because we do need some of that.
It is possible, John. It's possible now. I mean, I did some homework, and I was saying this to Matt at the beginning today. I did some homework in terms of numbers in our university to see how many people we could say were alumni who had a forces link. 990. 990 people. And I was like, wow. I mean, because most of the time, if I work with people who say that that's their background, there might be 2 or 3 in a group. Maybe not more than that, or 2 or 3, or the children, family of people from the forces. But to actually realize that 990 people have gone through, and that to me, that's where I see improvement. If you ask me where I see changes, that's where I see changes. It's happening. People are doing it, and that's really good.
And you and Doug are working on an academic study looking on how the forces leavers are being transitioned into civilian life.
Yes.
Can you just give us a flavour of that? And I think we were speaking beforehand, you're going to be wanting input from forces leavers and who are in the process of transition, but also those who have transitioned. So could you both just give us a bit of flavour on what's happening there?
Well, I'll kick it off, and I know Doug and I will both come in at different points in it, but the study itself is actually about transition in Scotland. And what people don't realise, or maybe don't understand, is that actually Scotland has opened its doors to military people to settle in Scotland and wants them to come there and be part of that. But anybody who lives in Scotland will know everything in Scotland is different. Housing is different. Health is different. Law is different. Education is different. Nothing is the same. So if you are somebody who's transitioning out of the forces and you do your training down south and you come up to Scotland to live, it's like nothing will be as it should be and nothing will be clear. And Doug and I both met each other. I don't know whether he sees it as fortunate or unfortunate, but he came face to face with me, and we had both been working around about the same thing. And I actually think it's brilliant that what you have is you've got, I talk too much academic stuff, and I'm sure Doug will talk the military stuff, and we probably drive each other mad, but we bring different skills to the table, and that's really important. And our study is actually about understanding the experience of people transitioning in Scotland. And we've got 4 key questions that we're asking that are the basis of the study. And the first is, what are the service leavers' understanding of that transition and the challenges of that transition? So that'll be one of the questions we'll ask. Why do they decide to settle in Scotland? Was it because they were from Scotland? Was it because they like Scotland? What was it that actually attracted them to there? What were the mechanisms by which they made these decisions, in terms of, was it to do with the provision? Was it to do with something slightly differently? And then how were their skills and experience matched with, the landscape in terms of the challenges for their employment, for getting housing, etc.? How did they were they helped with matching that? Now, I was lucky enough to work with Lothian Armed Forces and Veterans Group over the last few months. And the other thing that's really good that's happening, and I'm putting a stand here for Scotland. Sorry, John, but I'm putting a little thing up here, is that you get the NHS all the councils and the forces working together in groups, working together to actually try and provide really good sort of services for people from that area. And that makes a big difference. So in our study, and this is where I was going to come back to transition, Matt, the first thing I'll do as a hard sort of headed academic is I'll do a literature review. So I'll go and I'll check the literature and I'll find out what we know and what's there. And that takes a bit of time. But within that, what we're finding, and this is me telling you a little bit about what's coming out from that, is that transition is not something, as I've said earlier, that's one stage, but also military transition and understanding what that means as opposed to other types of transition is quite important. And what we're also finding is some areas are very well researched and some areas are not. So there might be something a lot about health, but there might not be a lot about housing. So what that's doing at the moment is it's helping us to set questions. And what we will do is we will approach 3 different groups. We will approach people who are still serving and ask them, tell us a little bit about, what your plans are, what you're thinking about, what's helping you, what's not helping you, what have you done so far to actually do that, or what that's the first group. The second group will be people who are transitioning, those who are going through that process, who are maybe going through training programs or whatever. What's your experience? How are you finding it? What are the things that are enablers? What are the things that are standing in your way, specifically related to Scotland? And then the third one will be looking for people. We're kind of, Doug and I have, and I'm looking to Doug here as well, have kind of thought within the last 10 years, because there has been a number of studies done on older veterans in Scotland already. So it's kind of like, saying, what about the people who are just coming out, those who are, it's new, and finding out from them and asking them the same questions. And then from that, getting this very strong picture about what are the challenges that people are facing, so that we can go back to policymakers, we can go back to a lot of people who are behind this study. I mean, there was a lot of work done. A lot of it was done by Doug, where he met with people. I mean, Charlie Wallace, the Veterans Commissioner, people like that, Veterans Scotland, have actually signed up to this study and have said it's something that they want to support because they want to understand the findings. And that's where research and evidence is used in practice. So that's the academic bit, Doug, and I'll stop talking about research now.
Thank you, Jerry.
Okay.
Obviously, what I bring to the party is a good military network. Having spent a long time in the military and with all 3 services one way or another, but also having served up in Scotland, and it's quite a close-knit community. So I'm pleased to say we've got buy-in from not just Scottish Government and Veterans Commissioner and Veterans Scotland, the leading veterans military charity, but also lots of other organisations too, local authorities, NHS, and the services themselves. And the services in Scotland obviously have headquarters and they have officers whose role is looking at transition for people from that service, and we're speaking to them. So not to pour cold water on what Jerry has said, but although we are very keen to engage with those serving and those in transition, we will need permission to do that. So we will be making a formal approach to make sure we are allowed to do that. And hopefully that will be granted, because it's in the interest of everyone to make the processes better and improve the level of support given to those who are resettling. Scotland focused, just to be clear, this is people who are choosing to settle in Scotland. They might already be settling in Scotland. They might be Scottish, but they might not be living here. They might not be Scottish. It's from whichever service, wherever they're serving, they're coming to Scotland and they're settling and making a new life here. And those are the people we want to speak to. So we're very keen to reach into the veterans community and the serving about to be veterans community. And we'll be approaching people via social media and other means through the organisations that are working with us, and asking for people to help us, tell us about their experience. How much preparation did they do? Were they like John, busy until the last minute, didn't start early enough? Did they start really early? How much support did the system give them? How much support did the contractors, whose job it is, give them? What shaped their choices? It should be very interesting.
I think so. And I think the other thing about it that's really quite important when you ask us, Matt, what has changed? And I'm going to say thank you here to Forces in Mind Trust, who have actually funded our study. But Forces in Mind Trust have funded multiple studies all around families, around transition, around health, around mental health. And people sort of say, well, these are just studies that are done and nothing comes from them. But people like the Veterans Commissioner in Scotland uses those findings in his strategy document. And actually you can actually see clearly where there are changes that have come about because of this evidence that has been provided. And they have, there's a hub, and there's and it's based at Anglia Ruskin, but there is an actual veterans hub, and there's an incredible amount of information there.
Veterans and Families Hub.
Sorry, Veterans and Families. He always corrects me, but I don't mind. I like him. But I think the thing about it is that there is information there which is written academically, but there's also information which is written there for the layperson. So there's lots of support, lots of help. And I think that, when you see things like that happening, not everybody knows about these things. I mean, that they don't know they're there, but there's a lot that they can find out there that might help them and that might be quite useful. So our study is one of many studies. There's one from 2020 from Stirling University, which is about housing, which has been done all around housing. There's another one that was done, well, we stole the research fellow, that's how I know, from west of Scotland, who looked at veterans and the experience of veterans in Scotland. And that was funded by Poppy Scotland. So there are people and there are societies and groups who are actively funding sort of studies into that, to hear the voices of veterans, to hear the voices of the people that this concerns, and actually trying to make differences based on that. And I think that's the other change that I really wanted to get across today, Matt, that, people don't just do these things and they don't just go in books anymore. That happened in the past. They're used to make a difference.
It's an interesting point you make. You research and the findings from research don't always make their way to gospel, thou shalt do this, but they do sit as reference documents for people developing strategies. My MBA, which was at Napier University, I did some research, and the CEO of the company I was working for frequently referred to that thesis as reference material. So it even at that level, so that the information that is within those documents is not necessarily made gospel, but it is referred to. And we've gone well over the time, and Eric's going to skin me alive for doing that. But what I finally want to do, we could debate till Sunday on this, and it's a great subject, and many spin-off subjects. But if I was to give you a couple of minutes each just to summarise your key message to leavers, commanders, and civilian businesses, I'll just go around Jerry, John, then Doug. Then I'll make a few comments. But Jerry.
I think the takeaway I'd like to get people to get from this is that education is possible. Talk to us. Come in and talk to us. We can make it happen for you. It's not something that is like it used to be in the past. Universities have come down from their ivory towers and they recognize that they have something to offer people. Most of our students work as well as do their training and their studies at the moment. So it isn't that you just go to university and you can't do anything else. There are ways forward. Research is making a difference. Evidence-based information is making a difference. It's impacting on government. It's impacting at various levels. And please be a part of that, because a big part of this is hearing the voices of the people who know best, because you're the ones who can tell us. So please do work with us on this. That would be my takeaway bit.
Thanks, Jerry. John?
Well, I suppose my takeaway points would be first of all for commanders to use everything in their power that's got available. So understand what all of that is, and then set some kind of plan within the unit to actually be able to enact that, and make it happen. Don't let it just kind of disappear just because the unit's busy. Mm-hmm. For people, I'd say get on that. If it's not happening, ask why. Use everything that's available to you. Start to research and understand what that is. That's the beginning of ownership. It's all there for you already. And start to change culture yourself. We spoke about that. And to businesses, I would say start to understand what actual people bring to your business. It will be vast. It'll be great. As Jerry has already alluded to, many, not all, if not all, people leave the forces are very, very educated and very, very skilled.
Mm-hmm.
And they will, in most cases, bring something to your party that changes things for you, for a business.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Thanks, John. Doug.
Yeah, no, great advice from both. I think my key messages to service leavers would be to start early, start as soon as you can, and you know that's being proposed in the new sort of MOD doctrine, the new philosophy, if you like. But of course, when you join an organisation, you're keen to get stuck into that organisation. So hopefully that will filter down. Start early, and think how everything you do in your service career might help your future self when you're out. Make a note, make notes all the time, qualifications you gain, experiences you have, and take advice. Find the people who know, speak to people who've left, find out what it's like. For commanders, very much what John was saying, support everyone's transition efforts. It's a duty, it's a command responsibility to support people in going through what they're going through, in learning and developing and being promoted and being selected for specific jobs, but also in their transition to civilian life. And to civilian businesses, service leavers are a huge pool of talent. They have done all sorts of things, and you should not write them off. Take the time to find out what they've done and think a bit about what they might offer.
Excellent takeaway. Thank you very much, everybody, for participating in this. The discussion has been excellent. We've prior to me hitting record, we were discussing hedgehogs, rabbit holes, rabbits climbing fences, and then we were onto the yes, yeah, you've got the rabbit, excellent. No, absolutely fascinating subjects. There's enough material here, as I say, to debate till Sunday. So plenty of challenges, plenty of opportunities, and things being done to make things better. So really, that was the Crux Cast Takeover. It's back to Eric for next week. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a good day.